So hopefully it's visible. Uh, Thank you for allowing me to present this work here. And this work is basically optimizing answers design in QAOA for MaxCut, and it is in collaboration with IBM India. And so there are lots of new terms, most likely those who are not working in this field, like ansars and QAOA particularly. So the idea is that we will go through some introduction so that we are all on the same page, and then move to the idea of what we have done here. Now the point is, before we start with the actual work and all of these things, quantum has now become a kind of buzzword. So you had quantum mechanics, you had quantum chemistry, you now have quantum computing, and then there is quantum biology. Recently I am hearing there is something called quantum music. I have no idea what that is, but there is a quantum cafe, I think, in Germany. So quantum has become a buzzword, and it has given a feeling that anything and everything can be solved using quantum. So even last year there was a huge laugh in the community when some people were claiming that quantum computer can solve this pandemic problem. So yeah, so it is like quantum can solve everything and anything and everything that problem you have, just give it a quantum prefix and it will be solved. So I want to start with this, that I don't always think quantum computers are the solution, but when I do, I am usually wrong. Quantum computer is not going to solve everything in this world. It is not going to solve all the problems. It is not going to replace classical computers. But yes, it is supposed to be much faster than classical computer in some problems. But whenever we start with quantum computing, the first thing that people talk about usually is the Shor algorithm, because it kind of shows a problem that is still an NP problem in classical computer, the factorization problem, prime factorization problem, and that can be solved in polynomial time in a quantum computer. But we need a sanity check, because ideally, doing a short algorithm for breaking the crypto systems which are available nowadays, it requires thousands of qubits. And then if you consider the noise in the system, you have to do error correction, go for fault tolerance, so that goes to tens of thousands or maybe millions of qubits. And what we have today, IBM has a 65 qubit device, and they are perhaps aiming for hundreds of qubits in the next few years, and all the other research industries are in the same page. So thinking of millions of qubits is not maybe that is a futuristic work. People should work in that direction, but what we can do today with the quantum computers that are available, that is a serious question. And the problem that we will discuss today actually focuses on what can be done today or in coming few years, maybe a decade or something like that. So what we will do, as usual, we will go through a very brief introduction to quantum computer, just what things are the terminologies, what how they are different from classical systems, so that we are in the same page. And then we will come to this problem. The title was optimizing answers designed for QAOA. So we'll talk about what QAOA is, what answers is, and we will take a particular problem, the max cut problem. We will show the QAOA design, which is already well studied, and then we will come to how we can optimize the answers, different procedures for that. So let's start with the from the very beginning. So just speaking like this, a quantum system or a qubit, a quantum bit, is basically a vector in block sphere. So let's stick to this definition. There can be lots of additions and subtractions to what I said, but let's stick to this definition. So this is basically a block sphere. I should be able to get. Oh, okay, I don't know. Okay, this is a block sphere, and it's a unit sphere. So a vector here is a unit vector, and the idea is that the up direction is called 0 and the down direction is 1. So these are equivalent to the classical bits 0 and 1, but you can have any other directional vector, right? You can have vectors anywhere on the surface. Again, we will stick to the surface. You can have something which is not on the surface but somewhere inside the sphere, but we will not come to that. That is called a mixed state. So we will stick to pure state, and for our entire discussion, it will suffice if we think that a quantum state is a unit vector in a Bloch sphere, and it can be anywhere on the surface of the sphere. So if we start with one vector, so obviously one qubit, what we want is to give it some evolution. We want to evolve that state. Just having a state is not enough. So when you evolve the state, these are called quantum gates, and we'll come to what the representation of a quantum gate is. So this is one very well-known gate called the Hadamard gate. What it does is it takes this 0 to somewhere here. As you can see, it is somewhere here, and 1 to somewhere here. Now the representation of this, what we can think of this. So classically we had these two poles only, but quantum mechanically I am saying anywhere here is a valid qubit. So these things can be, again loosely speaking, can be considered as it is both in 0 and 1 at the same time. So it is written like this. It is called a superposition. So it is 1 over square root 2, 0 plus 1, and this is 0 minus 1, because you can see this, this will be like -1. But the idea is that anywhere in this sphere, it is called a superposition, and it is like in 0 and 1 at the same time. And this superposition is something that gives immense power to the quantum systems. So let's take a quantum circuit. So this is like a quantum circuit, Q0 to Q3. There are 4 qubits, and we are having these Hadamard gates. I am representing at H. So what will happen? So this is like for a single qubit, we had 0 and 1 at the same time. So if I have 4 qubits, we will have all 2 to the power 4 combinations at the same time. Because if we have 2 qubits, we have 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1 at the same time. So 4 qubits, all 2 to the power 4 combinations at the same time. N qubits, all 2 to the power n combinations at the same time. And if we do some operation here, that kinds of implies that you are operating that on all 2 to the power n possible combinations at the same time. So where it would have, in classically, it would often require you to do 2 to the power n steps. Again, all these things that I am saying is kind of loose. It is not mathematically very strict. I am just focusing on what is necessary for us to understand. So all 2 to the power n combinations can be operated on at the same time. But then the question comes that everything can be solved in a single shot, because if all combinations can be operated on at the same time, then everything can be solved in one shot. But no, here comes the idea of a measurement. If you measure a qubit, it can be in a superposition, but when you measure it, it will collapse to one of the 2 to the power n states with equal probability, because here you see we had 1 over root 2 as the coefficient, and the probability is given as the square of this. So if it is a complex number, it's the modulus square of the modulus. So it is always a unit vector, so obviously this should hold, and the sum of the probabilities of all of these states should add up to 1. So here I simulated this in Qiskit, and you can see that all the 4 states, all the 16 states, they are more or less equally probable. You can have any one of the output with equal probability. So just creating this state is not sufficient to like solve everything in one step, because anyway this is like a random guessing, nothing more than that. So for an algorithm, what a quantum algorithm basically is that you kind of create such an superposition state, and then whatever your required outcome is, you try to do some gate operations in such a way that if say 0 1 1 1 is my required output, then this probability becomes very high, close to almost 1. The other probabilities becomes very low. So this is just like a randomized algorithm, but you can do it faster because of this superposition. In most of the case, you can do it faster. So not always that you need to have equal superposition. You can have many other gates. So these are called parameterized gates. So Rx basically means rotation around x-axis by an angle pi by 3. For this rotation, you can have by some angle theta. So you can see that here we get a state like this. And if you apply Rx on all this and measure, this is not an equal superposition. You have the probability of getting this all zero state is pretty high, much higher than the other states. Obviously, you don't need to, in a quantum circuit, I'll show one example as well. In a quantum circuit, you always don't need that all the states will have the same gate. These are true. But these gates, there can be many other gates. So Rx is rotation around x-axis by an angle theta. You can have Rz, rotation around Z axis by an angle theta, or Ry, rotation around Y axis by an angle theta. So these are some important gates that we have seen. These are called single qubit gates because they are operating on a single qubit and evolving it. There is one 2-qubit gate which is extremely important, and it is called the controlled NOT gate. So this is a 2-qubit gate. So the idea is it is represented like this. This dot is called the control and this plus sign is called the target. The idea is when control is 0, then the target remains unchanged. But when control is 1, the target is flipped. So you can see here when control is 0, the target remains unchanged. But when control is 1, the target is flipped. And here I have shown an example that when you have, suppose this is the control, 1, 0, after CNOT gate, you will have this 1, 1 state. Now, using these gates, we can build a quantum circuit. So, as I said, that mathematically speaking, that you have this a qubit is basically a vector in block sphere. So it's a unit vector and it's a 2 cross 1 vector always for a qubit. So an operator on that is a 2 cross 2 matrix, and from the postulates of quantum mechanics it is said that it should be a unitary matrix. So any quantum gate that I was showing, CNOT gate, Rx gate, Hadamard gate, all of these gates should be 2 cross 2, not 2 cross 2. Single qubit gates should be 2 cross 2 unitary matrices. And here are some matrices, like this is the Pauli X matrix, and this is just like bit flip in classical. This is Pauli Z. This is the Hadamard gate that we have already seen, and this is the controlled NOT gate. This is a 2-qubit gate, so it should be 4 cross 4. And obviously, since every unitary matrix is invertible, so we have that every quantum computation is inherently reversible. So this is the idea, and here is like a quantum circuit, and this is in fact the QAOA quantum circuit that we will be using henceforth. So these are different kind of gates acting on, and this is the measurement. So the quantum circuit is basically a sequence of gates, and one thing that we need to note that this wire does not mean that the qubit is moving around along this. The wire simply represents evolution in time. The qubit remains in its place. First the Hadamard gates are operated on it, and then time changes the CNOT gate. So this is basically time ongoing, time going forward. And after computation, this is a measurement that you do. This is again the Qiskit representation of a circuit. Qiskit is the software that is used for simulation by IBM. So this is the measurement. You do the measurement. The measurement outcome is taken in a classical register, because we have seen that even if we have a superposition, the measurement outcomes are basically classical. You have one of the outcomes. So these measurement outcomes, as you can see from here, so these are the measurement outcomes that you will have. So they are classical basically. So this is the quantum circuit. And now what we move to next is noise in quantum systems. So even in classical theory, we have noise. Noise is unavoidable. But in quantum system, noise can be even more dangerous, because the simple idea is that you see that this is basically a qubit. It's a vector. So if by some unwanted noise these undergoes some change, so what will be a change? It will be just a rotation, nothing else. This will be a rotation. So rotation can be by any angle theta, and theta is a real number, so there are infinitely many possibilities. So there are infinitely many errors and things like this. So it turns out that quantum systems are much more prone to noise than classical systems. So obvious explanation or obvious solution to that is quantum error correction. But as you understand, or you can think of that, in quantum error correction, what do? We take the information of a single qubit and we project it to many qubits. But now we have, like, say, hundreds of qubits, and it turns out that if you use, like, there are codes like Shor code, Steen code. In Shor code you need to project the information of a single qubit into 9 qubits. In Steen code you project it into 7 qubits. So even if we have things like 9 qubits or 7 qubits, and we have a total 100 qubits at hand, the total number of logical qubits, that is the qubits which are protected using error correction, and the qubits which we can use, they become much smaller. And then we have something called surface code, which is much more used in the quantum system, or they are thought to be the future of error correction. Surface code has a much larger requirement of qubits, and maybe using 100 qubits, you won't even have a single fault tolerant logical qubit. I don't know exactly, but maybe you won't. So when we think of near term systems, error correction is not a solution. So but we'll come to what a solution there is, or what some probable solutions are. But we will mainly focus on two types of noise. There can be many other types of noise, but these two are extremely dominant, so we will focus on those only. First is the gate error. So suppose you want some gate, you are operating a Hadamard gate or a CNOT gate or RX gate, all the gates that we have seen, these gates can be like they are not perfect because of all these pulse and microwaves, and these are not fine, these are not doing properly, working properly, they are not perfect. And this is usually modeled as a perfect gate followed by one of these Pauli operators. Now, when you come to a 2 qubit gate like a CNOT, so if you recall, CNOT means that this is the control and this is the target. When control is one, target is flipped. These type of gates are much more dangerous in terms of error. Why? Because suppose you have a Hadamard gate, it's a single qubit gate. What can happen is that it is followed by some unwanted Pauli operator and you have some error in your computation. Fine. But suppose this is x, this is x is basically sigma x, and this is like a bit flip. So suppose this was 1, and this was then supposed to flip. Whether it was 0, it should have become 1. Whether it was 1, it should become 0. Now there is this bit flip error, and the 1 becomes 0. So what will happen? Anyway, this qubit is erroneous because this should be 1. This has now become 0. So anyway, a remaining entire portion is erroneous. But since this has changed, the operation of the CNOT gate is also faulty now. Because now, if this was 1 and this was 0, it should have flipped to 1. But since this has become 0, it will not flip. So this portion also remains faulty. And by the same logic, this fault will propagate here, error will propagate here, and this qubit will also become faulty. So from a single error, you can have like chains of errors in the system. And that is why CNOT gates are extremely dangerous in terms of error. One more error that we will focus on is something called the relaxation error. The idea is, like, if you are creating a quantum system in the state 1, so 1 is basically a terminology that we use to make it similar to quantum, like classical computer. But what is it? You are just providing some extra energy to some atom maybe, or adding some more frequency to an oscillator, these type of things, taking it to a higher energy state. And if you leave it there, what will happen, that the system has a natural tendency that it will just come down to its ground state. Any system has the tendency to return to its ground state, just spontaneously decay the extra energy and return to its ground state. So it's called coherence, decoherence. So this is the relaxation error, that the system tends to relax. So you have the state at 1. If you leave it idle, it will slowly come to 0. Or in other words, if you measure it in this situation, you will always get 1. But after some time, if the system becomes like this, then with some probability you can also get 0. So there is some error in the system. And this is usually characterized by something called the T1 time. And the idea is that you create a state in the, you create a qubit in the state 1, leave it idle for time small t, then measure it. You repeat this experiment many times, so that you get an idea of the probability, that after some time small t, what is the probability that the system is like getting a 0 output or a 1 output. And then you express it in this way. So if you know this, the value of capital T1, you know everything about this error. So that is why it is sometimes called T1 error as well. And in the IBM current devices, it is usually in the range of 50 to 60 microseconds, this T1. And there are some devices where they are around this 100 120 microseconds. So ideally we want higher, like T1 time. Now, these are some near-term systems. This is the IBM 7 qubit device. So IBM already has a 65 qubit device already there, but this is the picture that I could find. And this is the Google Sycamore chip that is around, I think, 54 qubits or 53 qubits. So these are termed by Preskill as noisy intermediate scale quantum device. So the idea is that these are quantum device, but they are noisy because we are not doing any error correction, simply because we will, if we do error correction, we will be having a few, very few logical qubits, and you cannot do anything useful with like 2 or 3 qubits at hand. And they are intermediate scale because you have at most a few hundreds of qubits, not in the range of millions or tens of thousands or things like that. And if you want to do some algorithm in such devices, obviously there are some requirements, like your algorithm should not require thousands of qubits. If you have access to 100 of qubits, your algorithm should require less than equal to 100 of qubits, or there should be some scheme by which you can reuse qubits. So the qubit requirement should be small, and you should have shallow circuit. So what I mean by that, if you have a very deep circuit, there are multiple gates, then as you go on adding gates, these gates will have errors, it will be subjected to the relaxation error, and after some time the noise will become dominant and the output of the computation will not give you any information. So you should have shallow circuit, something that can be executed within the t1 time of that device. So these are the requirements that we have for NISQ algorithms. And this is like the 65 qubit device I was talking about, the IBM Q Manhattan. I'll not spend much time here, but this is the connectivity. These are the qubits, the nodes are the qubits, and the edges basically. That means that you can, so see, there is an edge between 3 and 4, so you can do a CNOT gate between 3 and 4. There is no edge between 3 and 16, so you cannot directly do a CNOT between 3 and 16, but you can move this 3 using swap gates to here and then do a CNOT gate. So these are like the limitations that are in the hardware now. This is called the coupling map, and not all the qubits have the same error probability, not all the interactions have the same error probability. But the algorithm or the method that we are going to propose in a few minutes, that is hardware independent. It will not really matter whether this is the underlying hardware or you have some other kind of coupling map, underlying coupling map. It will not be bothered by that. So let us come to this near-term algorithms. We have already heard about the requirements of near-time algorithms, and one algorithm, that is one method that is used largely for near-time algorithms, is called a variational algorithm. So the idea is that, okay, you cannot do a long computation because of this noise, but what you can do is you can break your problem into some independent modules. Like there can be interaction between the modules, but you can like break them into some individual modules, and some of these modules, those of which will actually gain some speed up by being implemented on a quantum system, you do those modules on a quantum system, and the other things do it on a classical system. For example, if you require sorting for any particular algorithm, why should you bother to go to a quantum device for that? You can just do it in a classical device and take the output and give it to a quantum system. So this is the idea of something called a hybrid quantum classical algorithm. So there are like two processing units, one quantum processing unit, this is the quantum processing unit, and there is a classical processing unit, and there is interaction going on between these two in both ways. The idea of almost every variational algorithm is that you prepare some quantum state depending on the problem you have at hand. You prepare a quantum state and then you apply some circuit. So this circuit is called ansatz. So this is the ansatz that we will focus on, how to get a good circuit maybe, or not really. The circuit is well defined. How can you optimize it even further? So this is the ansatz, or this is the quantum circuit, and then you do some measurement. From this measurement outcome, you do some classical processing. So there are some, you see, there are some parameters theta. You do some classical processing, find out the value of an objective function, and then you give it to a classical optimizer. So from this value of the objective function, the classical optimizer will suggest you a new set of parameters that will further minimize or maximize whatever your problem is. So then again, with this new parameters theta, you give it to the quantum system, you prepare the state with the new parameters of theta, and then you continue this loop. And you continue this loop until convergence, or if you have a number of iterations that you are willing to do. And so the obvious requirements, as I have already stated, just here in term, that the depth of this preparation circuit should not be very high. Like you cannot say, okay, I am doing everything fine here, but my preparation circuit is this long. That won't help. And then the answers, this also should be shallow. And the third thing that is kind of important for these algorithms is that you cannot have a large number of parameters theta, because if you so have, then the classical optimizer itself will take up a lot of time. So anyway the speed up will be lost. So the number of parameters should be small. And there is a trade off here, because if you make the number of parameters too small, the expressibility of this algorithm becomes small as well. So you should find some optimal number of parameters. Both of these things should be balanced properly. And there are many applications of this. The first application was actually shown in quantum chemistry. Then we have quantum machine learning, quantum state preparation, but we are in SEMU, so we will be focusing on combinatorial optimization. And QAOA, quantum approximate optimization algorithm, is a subclass of this hybrid quantum classical algorithm that is specifically designed to find good approximate solutions to combinatorial optimization problems. And for this particular work, we will focus on finding the maximum cut of a given graph, because that was basically the first algorithm that was studied, and it is the most well studied algorithm for QAOA. Okay, so let's come to specifically QAOA. Just to give you some idea of max cut. So the idea is that you are given a graph, you need to partition the vertices into two disjoint sets. So here you can see the black colored vertices and the white colored vertices, such that the number of edges crossing this bipartition is maximized. And why this problem is basically chosen, it is an NP hard problem. And there is one more thing, that it is an APX hard problem as well. So there is no polynomial time approximation scheme that can find you an epsilon close approximation if you just specify some epsilon. So these are even hard to approximate, this max cut problem. And till now, the best known classical algorithm is this Goman-Williamson algorithm that gives an approximation ratio of this 0.878. And it is already shown that if you can get a better approximation ratio than this, then it can prove that P is equal to NP. And there is one more conjecture, which I am not very knowledgeable about, but there is something called a unique game conjecture. If that is true, then it basically shows that this approximation ratio of Goman-Williamson algorithm is the best approximation ratio that you can do. So this is basically a hard problem, and it was natural to take this for QAOA, because QAOA is basically not really striving to give you the best result, but it is striving to give you a good approximation ratio, which is even hard for this particular problem. So we'll come to the quantum formulation of max cut. So this is the max cut problem. How do we take it to the quantum formulation? So the idea is that you have a set of vertices V. For each vertex small v, you associate a qubit with it. And then you have a Pauli operator. So I talked about Pauli operator, sigma x, sigma y, and sigma z. The operation of sigma z is such that if you act sigma z on 0, it gives a +1 eigenvalue. And if you act sigma z on 1, it gives a -1 eigenvalue. So this is the operation of sigma z operators. Now the point is that you associate a qubit with all of these vertices, and then if a particular vertex is in partition A, you take V is equal to 0. So if you have sigma z acting on V, it will give you a +1 eigenstate. And if it is in partition B, then you say that V is equal to 1. So sigma z acting on V will give you -1 eigenvalue. So this is very simple. And then for each edge E, you associate this particular operator. So what this particular operator does, it's extremely simple to think of it. So say that you have this edge uv, and sigma z u implies sigma z is applied on the qubit u, and sigma z v implies it is applied on the qubit v. So suppose both u and v are in partition A. So what will happen? Both u and v are 0, and sigma z on that will give +1 eigenvalue. So both +1 taken together, multiplied together, gives +1, and 1 minus 1 will be 0. So there is no contribution from those edges. And the similar, if both of them are 1, then this will give a -1 eigenvalue, this will give a -1 eigenvalue, their multiplication will be +1. Again, we will we are back with 1 minus 1 is equal to 0. So if both the vertices for an edge, if both of them are taken in the same partition, then that particular edge is not contributing anything. But if we have one of them is 0, the other is 1, so suppose u is 0 and v is 1, then for u we will have this plus 1 eigenvalue, and for v we will have minus 1 eigenvalue. The product is minus 1, and here we have a minus, it will be plus 1. So the summation will become 2, and this is basically a normalization, dividing by half. So that edge contributes 1. And you can easily check that it doesn't really matter whether you have 0 1, if this is 0 this is 1, or this is 1 this is 0. Anyway, the product will be minus 1, and this will add up to give 2, and there will be a contribution of 1. So this particular operator here, this basically means, this is also called a Hamiltonian operator. This particular operator basically implies that when you have a graph, if the two vertices are in two different partitions, then this particular operator is giving a contribution of plus 1, and if they are in the same partition, then this operator is basically not contributing anything. So now we have this quantum formulation of max cut. You want to maximize the sum over this operator for all edges. So now this is like an equivalent formulation for max cut. This is a quantum formulation we can think of, or it's sometimes called the Ising formulation as well. So this is basically the way we will look at in quantum systems. This HP is called a Hamiltonian operator. So Hamiltonian operator basically in terms of quantum mechanics is a Hermitian operator. So it's like it's a bit more strict than normal gates. Normal gates are unitary. So this will be a Hermitian operator, and it when acting on a state basically gives back the energy of the state. But that is the physics definition of this of Hamiltonian. For our case, we will think of that this is the problem Hamiltonian, and that is why HP. This is the problem Hamiltonian that we have in hand. Now the problem is when we think of QAOA, QAOA is actually derived from something called adiabatic quantum computing. It says that if you have a problem Hamiltonian at hand, then adiabatic quantum computing asserts that if you can create the ground state of that Hamiltonian, that is the solution to your problem. So obviously not for every problem you can create the ground state very easily. Then you could solve things very easily as well, because anyway what we did here, there was nothing very quantum about this. So you can always do this classically and then just create the ground state if that were easy. So the idea was that you start from some other Hamiltonian whose ground state is easy to create, and then you try to evolve your system from that easy Hamiltonian to this difficult Hamiltonian. But this particular adiabatic quantum computing, this is a very different type of quantum computing, which is not all this gate based, and QAOA is kind of a discretization of that, where this continuous trajectory from the easy Hamiltonian to the difficult Hamiltonian, you break it down into some discrete pieces. And obviously if you break it down into very small number of pieces, then you do not expect to reach the exact solution point, but you should be close to that. And it has been shown already that if you break it down into multiple pieces, then it starts getting closer. And if you break it down into infinitely many pieces, that is same as like following the continuous trajectory, then it gives you the absolute perfect solution. But we will not bother ourselves with that. So this QAOA, as we talked about, this is a quantum classical hybrid algorithm. So some of its steps are classical and some of its steps are quantum. The idea is that here, although this is the structure.
Ritajit, I have a question in the last slide.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so this maximization should be over like partitions. We should try to maximize here, right? We should try to find the partition.
Yes, you want to find the partition for which this is maximized.
Okay, so when you're saying maximize HP, is it like maximize over the partitions P?
Yeah, so this is what you are saying is absolutely correct, but this is basically the way they are written in paper. So it basically means that you want to find the partition such a partition, you want to assign this 0 and 1 in such a way that this summation is maximized. And that is the same as what you are saying, find the best partition.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So instead of starting with point 1, let me start with point 2, although this is actually the structure. So first you create an initial state. So that means this is how you create an initial state. You have suppose an n vertex graph, then you will have n many qubits, and you apply Hadamard qubit on all of them. So what Hadamard does, if you recall, it creates an equal superposition of 0 and 1. So why this is helpful? Because see, this is a symmetric problem. Max cut is a symmetric problem. If you so take this example graph. So the best partition is obviously you take this as 0, take this as 1, or you can take this as 1, this as 0. They are similar. So if you somehow can find the best partition, it doesn't matter whether 0 1 is the assignment or 1 0 is the assignment. So an equal superposition works well here. And so you create such an equal superposition, and then this is the ansatz. It is broken down into two pieces. So this is called this HP is what we have seen already. This is the HP, and HB, it is basically, oh, I should have written somewhere, sorry. So HB is basically sum over this Pauli matrix X acting on all the qubits, and that is this unitary for that is denoted by this RX gates. So these are parameterized gates, and this gamma 1, these are like the values of gamma, these are the values of beta. So you repeat this P many times, and for each of this, so this is where this first initialization state comes, and you want to initialize P many parameters for beta and P many parameters for gamma if you have a depth P QAOA. And this can be easily done classically. You don't need a quantum computer for this. And then you create this state. This particular picture that I am showing, this is for this graph. I didn't take any difficult graph because it will start getting bigger and clumsier. And this is for P equal to 1. So first you initialize, then you have this UHP gamma, and UHP gamma is actually implemented. This will become important later. This is implemented as a C naught, RZ, C naught, and UHB. What HB is, if you remember, it was sum over Xi, as I said. So UHB beta is represented by this RX gate acting individually on each qubit. So you repeat this P times and then you measure it. So you when you measure it, you get some outcome. So from that outcome, you can easily find out the cut value. Now you repeat this many times with the same gamma beta so you repeat this many times, and then you will get an expectation value of the cut for this particular circuit. Once you have the expectation value of the cut, you give that to the classical optimizer. The classical optimizer will suggest you a better gamma beta, the better parameters gamma and beta, and you again do the same thing with gamma and beta with the new sets of gamma and beta. So the idea behind this is, so there is like a bigger loop where it is executed with the same parameter gamma beta. It is updated in a classical device, and then again the same loop is repeated as I showed. But this particular loop, it itself is repeated many times, created the same copy many times, and repeated the same circuit, because to find the expectation value, you cannot find the expectation value from a single measurement. So what is expected is that if you do this many times, you find gamma and beta, good gammas and betas, then you will have a solution which is very close to the best cut. Now, these are some of the promises that we have from QAOA. First is that the expectation value is a non-decreasing function of the depth P. So P is how many times you are applying this particular circuit. How many, this is the ansatz. How many times you are applying this. So expectation value is a non-decreasing function of P. We cannot say it is a monotonically increasing function. Sometimes it is not, but definitely it will not decrease. This has been proved. Now, if P tends to infinity, so as I said, P tends to infinity basically means you are breaking the continuous trajectory into infinitely many small pieces. So that means you are actually following the continuous trajectory. So if P tends to infinity, QAOA will produce the optimal solution. But what is interesting is that for three regular graphs, even for P equal to 1, which is the worst possible thing that we can have, this only. So for three regular graphs, this gives an approximation of 0.692. So one can say that this is not as good as Goleman-Williamson, but then at the same time, see, this is better than random guessing, and this is just for p equal to 1. So it is like independent of the size of the graph, and like this is a constant number of iterations. Even in constant iterations, you are getting something much better than random guessing. And there is one more thing, is that the probability of the states, the probability distribution that is generated by QAOA at p equal to 1. Again, I am not very knowledgeable about these complexity theories, but it has been shown that this cannot be this probability distribution cannot be efficiently sampled in a classical computer unless you have p equal to n. And one more thing that is very nice about this is that it requires only two parameters per layer. So here you see it, we have only two parameters. So the load on the classical optimizer is pretty low. But there are obviously some limitations. There is a recent result that shows that using constant p, you cannot hope to outperform Goleman-Williamson, or you cannot hope to even match it. So this result, this is again from IBM Watson, but this result is a negative result. They showed that if p is less than order of log n, then you cannot hope to outperform the best known classical algorithm. But they didn't say how big p should be for which that can be achieved. But one thing that is uh, like critical here is that there has been an experimental validation of this by Google, and they have shown that beyond p equal to 3, the performance is actually decreasing. So this directly contradicts with this. I said that this is a non-decreasing function, and we see that beyond p equal to 3 for this Google experiment, the performance is decreasing. And here comes noise. The reason is basically noise. Noise is the culprit. So if you want to solve this, you have three things that you can do. You make better devices, so that let's leave it to experimentalists and these research industries. We cannot do that. There is another thing that is called error mitigation, where you don't use error correction, but use some low complexity classical or even quantum techniques that will mitigate the effect of error. But the third thing that we are kind of proposing for the first time is that you can tweak the answers to reduce error. It will not change the result, but it will reduce the error. So this is a bit, this is, I think, to the best of my knowledge, this is a novel work. There is no such thing known in the literature. So once more, I showed this earlier as well, but I kept it here because when I am trying to reduce the error probability, see, yeah, I don't know, these are pretty small, whether it is properly visible, but you can see that the C0 error, the error probability of C0 gate is in the order of 10 to the power minus 2, whereas that for single qubit X gates is order of 10 to the power minus 4. So C0 gates are 100 times more likely, and we will be more interested in reducing C0 gates than single qubit gates, because these are much more erroneous, as obvious from the data, from experimental data of IBM quantum computer. And this is also a data from any system. Like for every industry, C0 gates are much more worse than single qubit gates. So the two questions that we will look at here: is it possible to reduce some C0 gates without hampering the working principle of the answers? So you can understand I have put it in the slide. So definitely it is possible. Otherwise, I wouldn't have put this question in a slide. And second thing is there a systematic way to do so? Just by saying it is possible is not sufficient. Is there an algorithmic way by which we can achieve that? So let's come to that. We'll present two techniques here. But before coming to the techniques, I want to first uh, discuss when can we remove a C0 gate. So just recall, this was like the thing. This was the circuit, and we are focusing, the C0 is here. So we are focusing only on this part. So this part, this is a depth 1 circuit, so you cannot have a lower depth than that. So this is the minimum relaxation error that you will have to like allow. This is also a depth 1 circuit. This is the minimum relaxation error that you will have to allow a single depth, and these gates have much low error probability. So we will only deal with this portion here. So here we have this portion, and suppose, so you here we had this equal superposition because Hadamard gate was before this. I have removed the half here. So it is 0 0 0 1 1 0 1 1. So if you see, if you use the first CNOT gate, what will happen? Recall what CNOT does. If the control is 0, nothing happens. If the control is 1, target is flipped. So here nothing will happen. Control is 0, control is 0. This one will flip. 1 0 will become 1 1, and 1 1 will become 1 0. Now what RZ gate basically does, RZ gamma, it keeps the state 0 unchanged, and the state 1, it gives the phase of exponential I gamma. So here you see, if you now add the RZ, this is on the second qubit, this is 0, this is 1, so this is exponential I gamma, this is 1, this is exponential I gamma, this is 0, nothing happens. Now you have another C0, nothing happens, nothing happens, 1 1 becomes 1 0, 1 0 becomes 1 1. Now see this last thing. So what it kind of does, it is kind of marking the states which are good. 0 0 is not a good state, that is not a valid cut. 1 1 is not a good state. 0 1 and 1 0 are good states, and this entire operator is kind of marking those two states, that these are good states. Now let's remove this particular CNOT gate. What happens? So the RZ is the first thing that occurs, nothing happens here. Here we have 1 exponential, nothing happens here. Here it is 1 exponential. Now we have another CNOT gate. Nothing happens here. Control is 0. Control is 0. This is flipped to 1 1. This is flipped to 1 0. So see, once more, the ordering is changed, but addition is commutative. Ordering is changed, and again the good states are marked. But obviously this is valid only for equal superposition. I have said that this is like half in front, which I have not kept here just for brevity. But if this was not an equal superposition, so if this was A, B, C, D in front of this, then these two wouldn't have been same. So you need to have an equal superposition to allow this. And for this particular p equal to 1, you have equal superposition. But beyond p equal to 1, in this position, if you apply this again, the equal superposition is not retained, because after this the superposition becomes unequal and the good states have a higher probability. So you cannot apply this kind of optimization beyond p equal to 1. But anyway, if you can apply it on p equal to 1, that is retained throughout, right? If you have a, say, p equal to 10 algorithm, and for p equal to 1 you can reduce some gates, that reduction is retained throughout. So even this is good. So this is basically the main idea of when we can remove a CNOT gate. Now what do we do when we want to write it in a paper? We write it in a very scary mathematical form, which even I feel scared now seeing, but it more or less conveys the same information with some additional informations. Now those additional informations are like, you, even when you don't have an equal superposition, and if you have like edge disjoint situations, then also this will work. So those additional informations are here. But anyway, this is a very complicated way of representing something this simple. So this is when we can remove a CNOT gate. Now, from this particular observation, we can come to a corollary. Is that suppose we have a graph, and this is what I'll term as U1, and this is I'll term as U2. So I want as many U1s to be converted to U2 as possible. So when can we do that? First is that if we have something like this, and if both these vertices are acted on for the first time, then they are anyway in equal superposition. So you can remove this particular gate. And there is one more information that is not very well conveyed in this particular example, but that is the more extra thing that is in this very complicated thing, is that if you have such a situation where you have, suppose jk is an edge and j has already acted on before, so it is possible that maybe the superposition of j, or the probability amplitude with j is not 1 over root 2, or basically 1 over 2 to the power n form. Even then you can use this if you use the CNOT in such a way that j is the control and k is the target, because control state never changes, right? We know that from this, control never changes. So even if this is not in equal superposition, that will work. But this two requirements, this one is fine. This requirement now gives an inherent ordering. What I mean by that, I already said that this is symmetric. So it doesn't really matter if you have 0 1 or 1 0, they are equally good. So you could have easily like taken this as control and this as target, this as control, this as target. That was same. But once you are going to this kind of thing, that is no longer valid. So if this qubit has already been in some other operation previously, then this has to be the control. So although this is not a directed graph, there is some kind of direction or orientation that is forcefully implied on this to ensure this kind of C0 gate reduction. So obviously, if we just randomly start picking edges and start operating, we cannot guarantee that many edges will conform to this requirement. So we need some algorithmic technique, and this is what we'll present now. The first one is the edge coloring based technique. So consider this graph and consider this edge coloring. So hopefully the colors are visible. These three are red, these two are blue, these two are black. So you have done some edge coloring in some way. Let's not right now. In the next slide, we will on in next two slides we will worry about that. Let's not worry about how we are doing the edge coloring, but let's say we have done the edge coloring in some way. Now take that color class which which is the largest color class. So here red has 3, that is the largest color class. And so see, these are edge disjoint, so you can do operations on them simultaneously. So I tried to give this curly braces there, but anyway, these particular barriers, they show the operations which can be done parallelly. So here if you see, this is one corresponding to the red, that is the largest. My algorithm requires that you should always have the largest color class in the first stage, in the first layer. And you can see, although this picture doesn't really show that they are operating simultaneously, that is because of these, but you see this is between 2 and 4, this is between 1 and 5, this is between 0 and 3. So there is no reason why they cannot operate simultaneously, and in fact they are. It is because of this overlapping that Qiskit draws it in this way. Here you can easily see, so you can use red or black. You can either use red here and black here, or the vice versa. It doesn't matter. All I care about is that you do the coloring and then take the largest color class, and the corresponding to this should be the first layer. Nothing else. That is my requirement for this. So just recall this particular thing here, this particular corollary that we said. For this first layer, all the qubits are being operated on for the first time. So this is corresponding to this, conforming to this first requirement, that if both the qubits are operating on for the first time, you can optimize them. So this is conforming to the first requirement. All of these edges, for all of these edges, all the qubits are operating on for the first time. So you can remove the first CNOT gates. So we have some optimization. And this is why I want the largest color class to be in the first layer, because that will give me the largest number of optimizations, or largest reduction in the number of CNOT gates. So for these two cases, there can be situations where these actually can be removed. Some of these situations can be like, some of these CNOT gates can be removed, but it is easy to come up with examples where that is not the case. So in the worst case, only the first layer can be optimized, and henceforth the layers cannot be optimized. So by optimized, when I say that an edge is optimized, I mean this this first CNOT gate can be removed. That is what I mean by when I say that an edge is optimized. So as I said, that for layers henceforth, it may be possible that in some of the cases you get some optimization, but you can easily come up with examples that is already given in our draft there where it is not the case. So we'll consider that optimization is on the first layer only. So now come to how we do that. Optimal edge coloring is an NP-complete problem. So we cannot just give like the exponential time as a pre-processing step of something that we will consider as a polynomial algorithm. That is not acceptable. So what we can do is, this Weising's theorem states that if you have a graph whose maximum degree is delta, you can color it with at most delta plus 1 colors. Now there is this Mishra and Gray's theorem. I have written it down here. I will not go through it. There is so many terms and all of those. This is the algorithm. I have taken it from Wikipedia basically. So Mishra and Gray's algorithm is a polynomial time algorithm that can color it with using at most delta plus 1. So there can be a controversy between this term and this term. I myself got confused when I first read it, but the point is that there can be graphs which can be optimally colored using H colored using delta many colors, but Mishra and Grice can actually give delta plus 1 colors for that using polynomial time. So this is not a perfect coloring, but anyway, this is the best coloring that we can have in polynomial time, and we are not willing to give an exponential time as a pre-processing step. So this is what we will stick to. Now this is the Mishra and Grice theorem. We'll use that as a subroutine to find the coloring, and after coloring I have already explained to you what to do. So now how many edges can you color using this? So suppose the worst case that can happen is that the colors are uniformly distributed. So if there are m many edges, and we have seen that it can be colored using delta plus 1 colors, then each of the colors have like equal number of edges. So this is the worst case that can happen. So it doesn't really matter which one you choose as the first layer, but even then you can color, each color class will have this ceiling of m plus delta plus 1, and that is the number of optimized edges. But the best scenario that can happen is that, see, for each vertex, how many edges be adjacent to it, you can give a particular color to only one particular edge. So the best scenario that can happen is that for all n by 2 this combination, for all uh, like these type of edges, you take one edge u and v vertices, you take another edge j and k vertex. So this is the best case that can happen, that all these n by 2 many edges can be given the same color. But this is a very special type of graph that will happen. So the optimized number of optimized edge is bounded by this. This is a very, I mean, this is not something that we expect most of the time. So this is the edge coloring based technique. What is good about this is that it also tells you how to find the minimum circuit depth for a given like P1 QAOA, and even for henceforth, even for P2 P3, this is the best you can do. You cannot have any better optimization of the depth. So the depth is minimized, and at the same time you are reducing one CNOT gate, so there is also CNOT reduction. So that is a good thing here. But can we increase the number of, like, reduction in the number of CNOT gates? So here comes what is the depth first search based solution. So consider this particular graph again. So anyway, when I tried to color it using network X, I don't know the orientation changed. So anyway, so suppose I am starting the DFS tree from this vertex 0. So this is my DFS tree. These two colored in black, these are not part of the DFS tree. So you start with some random vertex, you create the DFS tree. It will have n-1 edges for an n vertex graph, that is well known. And then what you do, so in the DFS tree, you use the ordering of the DFS tree. Start with the root. This is the first edge. So that should be your first operator. 0 and 3. That should be your first operator. Then 3 and 4. That should be your second operator. 4 and 2. Third operator, and so on. Once you are done with all the edges of the DFS tree, do the whatever you want with the remaining. You can again use this edge coloring technique to find out the minimum depth for that. But anyway, do whatever you want with the rest of the things. But the constraint is here. Once you have constructed the DFS tree, you have to follow that order. So 0 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 2. You are not allowed to now say that 0 to 3, 4 to 3. That will not work. Although this is an undirected graph, but here you are not allowed to do that. If you have taken 0 to 3, 3 to 4, that is how you should go. And that is how the control and target should go. Now, once we have done that, see the second one. The second corollary told us that you can actually remove CNOT gate even when one of the vertices has been acted on previously, if that vertex acts as a control. So here, this doesn't give us any problem because they are acting on for the first time. This qubit has been acted on already, but it is acting as a control. This qubit has been acted on already, it is acting as a control. This qubit acting as a control. So you can understand, if you follow the ordering of the DFS tree, you will always have the control target. You will always satisfy this requirement. And now, once you have done that, you can remove the first CNOT. So we are down from here to here. You cannot do anything about this portion. So you can use edge coloring technique to minimize the depth or whatever you want. You may use, you may not use, doesn't really matter, but you cannot do any CNOT reduction here. The CNOT reduction is only for the DFS tree portion. So now that we have this, let's come to some analysis. This analysis is easy. So the DFS tree will contain n-1 edges, and all of these edges can be optimized. So you have n-1 optimized edge. In edge coloring, we showed that in very like special situations, you can go up to n/2, but those were like ambitious situations. But here you can always have n-1 optimized edges, which is much larger. Now, can you do anything better than n-1? So I claim that no. The reason is, suppose take that you can do. You can have something like you can optimize n many edges. Fine. So if you optimize n many edges, take such an edge UV, remove it, take such an edge such that its removal will make the residual graph a tree. So now that it is tree, this U is also associated with some other edge, V is also associated with some other edge. So now if you want to add UV to this optimized edge, then what does this corollary require? It requires that U should act as a control, it requires V should act as a control, but that is not possible. In a CNOT gate, you should have one control and one target. So it is not possible that you can have more than n-1 optimized edge. So DFS technique is the optimum in the number of edges. So why do we even bother about edge coloring? So let's come to this analysis. This was the...
Just one second, Ritajit.
Yes.
I mean, we are running out of time, so maybe you can first speed up a bit.
Oh, yes, I am almost done. A few more slides, just a few more slides. Okay, so this was the optimization based on edge coloring, and this was the optimization based on DFS. And you see here we could reduce 3 CNOT gates, here 5 CNOT gates, but the overall depth of the circuit is 9 here, 13 here. So the problem of DFS is that the depth may increase. So the natural question is, when is that acceptable? Is it even acceptable at any point? So here we want to assume that the source of error is basically the depth of the circuit and the number of CNOT gates. That is the only source of errors. This is not perfect, but this gives more or less good result. So if you have k many CNOT gates, then the probability of no error is this 1 minus PCX, where PCX is the error probability of each CNOT gate to the power k. And this was, if you recall, this was the relaxation time. So this is the total probability of no error. Now, suppose after applying the DFS based optimization, this k1 many CNOT gates have been reduced and n1 many layers has been increased. So this becomes the probability of no error after applying the DFS technique. So what you want, that this should be greater than the no optimization case. And if you just plug in the values, this gives you that the increase in the number of layers should be bounded by some lambda times the decrease in the number of CNOT gates. And this lambda basically depends on the error probability of the CNOT gate, the time duration of the CNOT gate, and the T1 time. So these are hardware specific. And here you see that if you want to find out the lower bound of this, you can kind of divide the circuit into two parts. The one part is corresponding to the DFS tree, the other part is everything else. Now, those corresponding to the DFS tree has a maximum depth of n-1, and each of this layer has a single CNOT gate. So the depth of this portion is n-1, and for the remaining part, see, if delta was the maximum degree of the graph, the DFS tree, and if we take out the DFS tree, for each vertex, at least 1 degree is reduced. More can be reduced, but at least 1 degree is reduced. So we are left with a residual graph of maximum degree delta minus 1 at most, and that can be colored using delta colors. So delta many layers. Each of these layers are not optimized, so 2 CNOT gates for those. And if we were not using these things, then the graph can be colored with delta plus 1 colors, delta plus 1 layers. So that means 2 CNOT gates in each layer except the first layer. That is where the edge coloring comes into act. So 2 delta plus 1. So this is the increase in depth, and this gives you, if you just plug into this particular requirement, this gives you that lambda should be lower bounded by this. Now this value asymptotically is 1. This is always less than 1, but asymptotically this value is 1. And here we show that for IBM quantum devices, now IBM Melbourne is supposed to be one of their most noisy devices, and IBM Manhattan is one of their best devices. So for all of these cases, this lambda is greater than 2 actually, and we required lambda should be greater than equal to 1. So at least for superconducting qubits, this DFS technique holds always, and we can assert that this will work for any hardware where you have lambda is greater than equal to 1. So just 2 more slides for our result. So first thing is that when we actually map it on the quantum circuit, all these gates are not implemented in its way, because basically you need multiple pulses if you are going to apply all possible gates. Any unitary matrix is a gate, you cannot have that. So what is done, usually there is a set of basis gates that are actually implemented, and there is this hardware underlying connectivity, which we don't really bother, because whatever we have discussed so far, it doesn't concern the hardware in any way. But when we are talking about results, we have to implement that on hardware. That is why talking about hardware. So this connectivity issue comes into place, and then when the circuit is mapped, so we are not doing anything in the transpilation. Qiskit does it by itself. So when you come to this gate operations, some of these gate operations are reduced using logical equivalence. So here is an example. This is a random circuit, and if you just transpile it to this particular fake Vigo, this becomes the entire circuit. So these are like completely different circuits. You cannot even say that these two are same. But even after transpilation, if you see that the n-1 many CNOT gate reduction is retained, and that should be retained because the analysis totally was hardware independent. So, and finally we studied it for Edwards Renyi graphs with the probability of edge varying from 0.4 to 1. 1 is basically the complete graph, and we can easily see that this is the probability of success. This green line is the traditional QAOA, then we have the edge coloring, and then we have the DFS based technique. So DFS based technique actually outperforms edge coloring, which again outperforms traditional QAOA. And just to summarize, so we haven't talked anything about error mitigation. So you can take any error mitigation techniques that has already been proposed in the literature and apply it again on this system. So that will even give you further reduction to this, and any hardware dependent optimization is also applicable here. So it is like you can do a bit of pre-processing that itself reduces the error of the circuit, and then all those error mitigation hardware dependent things you apply to it. Henceforth you just keep on adding to it, that will start giving you better and better results. So hopefully this actually leads to better implementation of this of QAOA in systems. And thank you. And this is actually the picture of IBM quantum computer. I don't understand the experiments, but this is actually a picture of IBM quantum computer. Yeah, so I'm done.
Thanks, Vijay. Any questions from anybody?
Ritajit, good evening.
Yeah,
it was a very fantastic presentation, very contentful though, with a very good timeline. You explained it very neatly, but I have got only one out of the box question, which is quite associated with your work.
Sure.
I'm just wondering to talk about something like recently we worked on IBM Q, the Melbourne 2.06b, the noise rate that you talked about. Like, I was just wondering to understand, are there like the methods that you proposed? So have you ever simulated them on any of the circuit on the live what is a quantum enabled communication stuff? Just curious to understand, like, what could be the error differentiation that you would be able to handle it.
No, so we haven't. So this is maybe a limitation of this work, that this particular optimization that we are proposing is actually for max cut only. But maybe, yeah, this is also something that I have written, that maybe it is possible to take it directly or in some modified form to other stuffs as well. We haven't checked it for anything else. Yeah.
Okay, so that's thank you very much. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
thanks.
Nisaj, I have a question.